Hello everyone, this video is the first video dedicated to the 100 Years' War, story that lasted several centuries, and this is the first part of the introduction. Please like it if you do, subscribe if you don't want to miss more. So, let's begin. England possessed lands which are now belong to France since the time of William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy. It appeared to conquer England was much easier than William anticipated. Just one battle of Hastings, which happened in 1066, required. During this battle, Harold Godwinson was killed, and all Anglo-Saxon England died with him. After the Norman conquest of England, nobility owned lands on both sides of the Channel, which was quite convenient as both Normandy and England had one sovereign. It was until the death of William the Conqueror in 1087, after which his eldest son Robert became the Duke of Normandy, and the third son, the King of England, under the name of William II. Second son died in hunt accident. After the death of William the Conqueror, all major landlords were in difficult position, as William and Robert didn't like each other, and to please one brother meant to irritate another. The situation was resolved when Robert went to crusade, using the money William sponsored to him, in exchange for ruling over Normandy while Robert is away. William II was not married, and there is no information neither about his lovers nor about his children. But during his reign he added Isle of Man and Vexin, land between Rouen and Paris, to his domain. William II died in 1100, and Henry I, fourth son of William the Conqueror, became king. Though Henry I was not a soldier by his nature, he managed to take Normandy from his brother Robert, who returned home after crusade. Henry I ruled England and Normandy for 35 years without any riots and rebellions due to his wise domestic policy. Though Henry I had many bastards, he didn't leave the heir, and his attempts to force the barons to acknowledge his daughter Matilda as his heiress had failed. Instead of Matilda, barons chose Stephen of Blois, Duke of Normandy, grandson of William the Conqueror by his mother. This caused a civil war, which ended in 1153 by concluding Treaty of Westminster, by which son of Matilda, daughter of Henry I and Geoffroy Plantagenet, Count of Anjou Henry, was proclaimed as heir of Stephen of Blois. So, in 1154, Henry II became the King of England. He crowned his son, another Henry, while he was still alive, which was made the first and the last time in history. If you watch my video about William Marshall, you probably know the story. Henry the young king died of dysentery, and Henry II became the King of England one more time. When Henry II became king, he was a rich landlord, Duke of Normandy since 1150, Count of Anjou after the death of his father in 1151. He married extremely rich Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine and Countess of Poitiers, who inherited all her land and title from her father, who had no sons. Henry was the second husband of Eleanor. She married Louis VII, future King of France, when she was 15 years old, but after 15 years of marriage they divorced on the ground of blood relations, though the main reason was that she couldn't give a son to the husband and gave birth only to daughters. Henry married her just 2 months after the divorce, which was quite irritating for the French king. However, the chances of marrying a second time and finally get a heir most probably reimbursed the loss of Aquitaine and Poitiers, which English crown received.
Shut up and take my money!
So, Henry II during his reign added to his lands Aquitaine and Brittany, as well as proclaimed himself as sovereign of Scotland and Ireland, acquiring in total of large lands. Henry II told he ruled the country with his will and tiresome riding. Without good communication, medieval king had to ride across his land to maintain order and obedience. Out of 35 years of ruling, Henry II spent 21 years on the continent, which was a threat to his authority, and seeing England only as a source of income. However, 20 years after the death of Henry, his empire ended its existence as a whole, but the memory of it became one of the reasons of a 100 Years' War. After the death of Henry the Young King, Henry II decided to make Richard the Lionheart, his second son, his heir. He also decided to give Aquitaine to his third son, John. However, Richard, a soldier by the nature, who managed to subdue the Barons' rebellion, didn't want to give Aquitaine to John, and in the end invaded England with an army with the support of a French king Philip II. In 1189, Henry II, not very long before his death, had to conclude humiliating peace treaty, according to which 32-year-old stubborn Richard became the only heir of the king. When Richard took Acre in 1191, he ordered to execute all prisoners, but in the eyes of his contemporaries he still remained an exemplary knight, and the killed prisoners weren't Christians after all. Richard was a brave knight and a skillful military leader, educated man, patron of art, especially to musicians. He loved to sing himself, mostly the song of his own. He spent not very much time in Europe, and when in England he subdued rebellions, including his brothers. He anticipated in the Third Crusade, and when failed to capture Jerusalem, took the narrow line of Mediterranean coast from Tyre to Jaffa, when conquered Cyprus, perfect base for further military operations on Middle East. When Richard was returning from the crusade, he was captured by Leopold V, Duke of Austria, who sold him to Holy Roman Emperor. Richard spent 1 year in prison until he paid 100,000 marks as ransom, about $3 million to our money. To gather this ransom, special 25% tax on all rent and all movable property was introduced in Normandy as well as in England, while all population of these countries was about 3 million people. Richard was not very interested in ruling the kingdom, but was very good at finding good managers who could rule the country for him, in particular Walter Hubert, Chief Justiciar of England and Archbishop of Canterbury, who was not just a great administrator but an honest man as well. He participated in the Third Crusade, and when arrived at Acre he found the army in outrageous state. There weren't sanitation, food supply was very bad, soldiers and officers were dying from hunger and diseases. Hubert took management in his hand. He established supply of food and water, organized latrines, and placed the guards near the source of clear water, to whom he paid out of his own pocket. When Richard appeared at Acre, moral and combat readiness of an army was sufficiently better, and Hubert rose in Richard's estimation as the man who can work the difficult issues out. While Richard participated in crusade, and when in his imprisonment, French managed to press out English from their continental domains. And since 1194, Richard spent majority of time on the continent, trying to return lost lands and castles, rebuilding new fortifications, for example Chateau Guillard, which is still situated on the sea. Richard died on April 6, 1199, from the wounds made by a poisoned arrow he got during the siege of Castle Chalus-Chabrol, 20 miles to the southwest from Limousin. Richard was married to Berengaria of Navarre, but they have no children, and John, his brother, became the King of England. John was the youngest son of Henry II, and then opposed his father, invaded England with the French. John ruled Ireland very badly. He managed to make enemies among locals, as well as among Anglo-Norman aristocrats, who were trying to capture Irish lands. John tried to dethrone his brother Richard, and then, for the major part of his reign, conflicted with local nobility. His succession rights were acknowledged in England and Normandy, but Anjou, Touraine, and men consider Arthur, Duke of Brittany, son of Geoffrey, who died during the tournament in 1196, and John's nephew, as the rightful king. In 1199, Arthur was only 12 years old, and of course he didn't interfere with the rights of local barons to rule as they saw fit. As he was the only grandson of Henry II, Arthur was just a pawn in the play of the others. He was under guardianship of Richard I, spent a lot of time at French court, and as an owner of Brittany, Anjou and Maine, paid homage both to the French and English kings. Then John made very acute, as he thought, matrimonial move. He divorced his first wife, Isabella Countess of Gloucester, and married another Isabella, Isabella Countess of Angoulême, who owned lands between Aquitaine and Normandy, which was a good addition to the continental possession of the English king. But John made a mistake. Isabella Countess of Angoulême was betrothed to Hugo X, losing none. Having lost both betrothed and rich dowry, Hugo complained to Philip II. Philip received great chance to vex English king and imperatively invited John. After his denial in April 1200, he proclaimed all his continental lands confiscated. The only successful military operation of John allowed him to return lands on the continent and capture Arthur. Young Duke was first imprisoned in English town of Le Fallais and then transported him to the French Rouen, and nobody saw him since then. One of the theories says that he was killed by John himself, and after that his body was tossed to Seine. However, all John's efforts to return English continental territories were in vain. In 1024, King announced Duchy of Normandy confiscated and transferred to the possession of the French crown, except for the Normandy Islands, which are still in English possession. This caused further military actions. As a result, John lost all his continental lands, except for Poitou, which he managed to withhold in 1206. For his military incompetence, he was called John the Soft Sword, along with the John Lackland, which was received as Henry II left him without much inheritance. When he lost his continental lands, he spent so many time in England as no king of England since Norman invasion. To reimburse the losses in France, John needed money, and he raised taxes, which made barons very unhappy. Then he had a quarrel with Pope, who placed interdict on England. Then there was a civil war, in the result of which he had to sign Magna Carta. Then there was new military conflict with French and again new civil war. John died at 1216, and Henry III, his son, became the King of England, who inherited kingdom in the middle of the war. Barons uprised in the north. French landed to the south under the leadership of the King Louis VIII. Luckily, uprising soon vanished due to incoordination of barons, and English saw Louis as a usurper, but not the future king who was able to replace Henry III. In the end, in 1217, French were defeated in the Battle of Lincoln on the land and in the Battle of Sandwich on the sea same year. French pretender had to return to France, receiving a large sum of money for quicker return. Henry III tried to rule as his father, like sovereign, but he had to fight with barons, like his father did. He understood that due to Magna Carta he couldn't rule the kingdom alone, but despite of resistance he displaced from the state offices the majority of his palace's relatives who came to England to fix their finances, as Holy Land was no more available as it was conquered by Muslims. Henry III, as his father was not a soldier, according to the Treaty of Paris, he waived all of his right to Normandy, Maine and Anjou, leaving just Aquitaine for English crown. He also acknowledged himself as a French vassal, obliged to pay homage. Henry III ruled for 56 years. Though uprising and civil war occurred in his last years of ruling, he managed to establish stable administrative body. Henry III left the country in more or less centralized state, and grown-up son who started to gather military resources to return lost territories. Edward I was handsome, tall, athletic man and a good soldier. He adored his wife Eleanor of Castile, which was rather unusual for the king. However, he had tendency for duplicity. During the civil war he joined rebellion barons who fought against his father, and switched sides several times. More, sometimes he broke his promises and didn't fulfill his vassal obligations. In the Battle of Evesham in 1265, Edward, who fought against the army under the leadership of Simon de Montfort, 6th Duke of Leicester, leader of barons' opposition against King Henry III, showed a certain treachery, which led to the total defeat of enemy and the death of Montfort. During the battle, Edward ordered to raise captured banners to make an impression part of Montfort's army joined Edward, or to persuade Montfort he was encircled. Of course, we can view such actions as a ruse de guerre, but actions of his associate Roger Mortimer, who is considered killed de Montfort, was outrageous even for medieval standards. Mortimer severed de Montfort's hand and genitals and sent them to his wife, most likely to show his unparalleled teeth. In the same battle, Mortimer killed another leader of the rebels, Hugh Despenser, which became known only 50 years later. Worth noticing that in 1290 Edward expelled all Jews from England, receiving a lot from this, and during his conflict with Pope taxed all his representatives in England. One of the first initiatives of newly crowned Edward I was the commission investigating abuses which caused the civil war during the reign of Henry III. Edward tirelessly searched for corruption and other crimes of officials, trying to make sure all violations were made by the people appointed before his coronation. Edward even attempted to limit barons' rights. Many barons fought for their rights, telling they possessed them from the time immemorial. Edward I stipulated, though, that as such can be only privilege granted before coronation on Richard I in 1189, and rights and privileges which were acquired after should be confirmed with substantial documents. But in any case his administration not likely accept such document. At the start of his ruling, Edward managed to subdue Wales and almost totally liquidated independent Welsh authority. At that time in England hostile opinions of Welsh were imposed. They were accused in robberies, sexual licentiousness, and other conceivable and unimaginable sins. Welsh rulers by that time had neither administration nor legal system of ruling. As a result of military campaign of Edward in 1276-1284, Wales received limited government, which started to implement English law in the country. Edward I spread the idea Welsh wanted to be ruled by prince. Of course it was his idea, but Edward used it and created new title of Prince of Wales and gave it to his son, heir to the throne. In 1294, a 20th year of 54 years long ruling of Edward I, a war with France began. It was caused by the decision of Philip IV to confiscate Aquitaine. Same time, anti-English uprising started in Wales. In 1297, Scotland, which wanted independence, rebelled too. Preparation for the war with France revealed substantial lacks in English feudal system of army gathering and supply. During the reign of Edward I, king has the right to call for military service only the people he gave the lands to. All nobles with the servants served usually about 40 days, though sometimes the term of service can be prolonged. They were supported by local militia, governed for some period only. It was very expensive to make war. Army needed food, transport, barracks, and in some cases weapon and payment. There wasn't full-time quartermaster, so all vehicles, horses, and army supplies had to be bought or rented. Usually king was not able to finance military campaign on his own expense, so he had to raise taxes. But if during the time of peace the tax amount had to be decided with the assembly of English nobility, during the wartime the amount of taxes should be approved by the parliament. At first Edward respected the parliament, but when he needed more and more money, as well as soldiers for reinforcement in Aquitaine, so he started to stipulate an amount of taxes by himself. Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral died of an apoplexy stroke when he recalled of 50% tax on clergy's income. The king also made profit of wool producers. They were forced to sell their products to the king at price below market price, and when the wool was resold with high profit. Royal tax collectors traveled all over the country seizing food and grain. They said they took bribes and released the ones who paid to them, and took some seized products for themselves. Many barons called for the service, refused to come. When Edward threatened Duke of Norfolk he can be hanged, if he wouldn't go to Aquitaine. Duke kindly replied he had no intention never to fight in Aquitaine nor to die with a rope around his neck. By the time Edward swarmed with his expeditionary forces to Flanders in August 1297, England was about to start another civil war. Barons again was gathering for uprising like it was during John and then Henry II, but the war with Scotland spoiled all their plans. Until the death of Scotland King Alexander III in the accident, the relationships between England and Scotland was not very disturbing. King of Scotland William the Lion paid homage to Henry II, and King of England considered to be the sovereign of Scotland, though he had no rights to interfere in affairs of Scotland's administration. Alexander III left no direct heirs, and his closest relative was 6-year-old granddaughter, whose father was Eric, King of Norway. Edward I decided to marry his elder son Edward of Carnarvon, future Edward II, to Norwegian girl, but she died on one of the Orkney Islands on her way to Scotland in 1280, leaving too many competitors for Scotland's throne. Civil war was barely avoided thanks to the effort of Bishop of St. Andrews, who asked Edward I to start talks with contenders. As a result, only two of them left, Robert Bruce and John Balliol, both successors of Normans who owned lands on both sides of frontier between England and Scotland. Balliol had more lands. Great cause, the election of successor of Scotland's crown, ended with Edward's decision to appoint Balliol, which was rather fair, who was coronated in 1292. After the Balliol's coronation, Edward, encouraged by his efforts in Wales, decided to spend his influence to Scotland and to reinforce his army with local forces, which didn't cause much resistance from Balliol's side. However, as a result of such policy, Council of 12 was established, who deposed in 1295 of Balliol and took the rule over Scotland. They even concluded alliance with Philip IV. Fearing the war on two fronts, Edward invaded Scotland in 1296, defeating Scotland's army and insisted of unconditional surrender of Balliol and Scotland barons. If Edward re-established Balliol of Scotland throne and wouldn't insist on his feudal rights, there would not have been rebellion raised by Scottish. But Edward did otherwise. He decided Scotland should be ruled by his governor, vice king, and appointed Duke Warren, and put a governor to aid him spreading English law. Beside that, English priests started to take vacant position in Scotland churches. Finally, when Edward ordered to bring stone of Scone, indispensable attribute of coronation of Scottish monarchs, rebellion was inevitable. It started in 1297, when Edward arrived to Flanders to participate in war with France. As soon as Scottish raised their weapons, unrest caused by unfair financing of the French campaign in England ceased. English barons were resented of a rebellion of those who considered dominated. Meanwhile, Robert Bruce, who hadn't become king by decision of Edward I, easily defeated army of Warren, and then too presumptuous English army was heavily defeated during the Battle of Stirling Bridge in September 1297. English were ambushed by Scottish led by William Wallace. When reported about Scottish rebellion, Edward hastily made truce with Philip IV and returned to England. In July 1298, English defeated Scottish army under commander William Wallace in the Battle of Falkirk. It was the most bloody battle on British land until the Battle of Towton in 1461, but doesn't bring any sufficient success. After defeat of Falkirk, Wallace was accused of treason and executed. However, Scottish for a long time started to avoid battling English on open ground, but used hit-and-run tactics afterwards. That went on until 1304, when the majority of Scottish barons made an agreement with Edward. Peace in Scotland after 1304 didn't go on for very long. In 1306, Robert Bruce, who after the rebellion in 1297 was the Edward's loyalist, raised another rebellion and destroyed other competitors for Scottish throne and became the Scottish king in the end. More battles between Scottish and English followed. Edward died in 1307 on his way to Scotland. On his deathbed, he asked his son to go on conquering this obedient country. War expenditures was huge by that time, and Edward left also huge state debt to his son in amount of £200,000, about $30 million in modern money. Well, that's it for the first part of the introduction to the history of the Hundred Years' War. Hope you like it. More to come soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.